Everyone thinks the writers decide everything, but what if I told you you had the power to kill off a character or keep them alive? Sometimes the audience steps in and takes control. Think about it. The ending of a show, whether a character lives or dies, or even the way arcs are structured, can all be shaped by fans. From fans saving Yuji's life to them pressuring the biggest mangaka today. This happens way more than you even realized. One of the most infamous examples comes from 1988 when DC Comics let readers decide the fate of Robin. Thousands of fans picked up the phone and voted, and their choice literally killed a superhero. Jason Todd, for those who don't know, was Batman's second Robin. An impulsive, more reckless Robin that Bruce is used to dealing with. He replaced our original beloved Robin in 1983 and was met with a mixed reception. Jason was, in my opinion, a victim of replacement syndrome. Replacement syndrome is not a real thing, by the way, nor a commonly used phrase. It's just the best way I found to describe characters or shows that often get overlooked due to their predecessors. Jason was a more gritty and less idealistic Robin as opposed to Dick. He always questioned Batman's authority and felt more absolute in his sense of justice. He felt that Bruce was more forgiving than he should be. From my understanding, this did not resonate with the entire audience. There was a large divide amongst the fan base during the 80s with those who liked his confidence and bravado, and those who thought he was just a trashy replacement. Personally, I like Jason's Robin, but I was born 20 years after his initial release, so maybe I wasn't the intended audience. This finally leads up to one of the most iconic comic releases of all time. DC had enough of the polarized fan bases and realized it finally couldn't please them all. So in a never done before move, they held a vote, literally putting the fate of Jason Todd into the hands of the fans, and well, they executed him. Winning by a mere 72 votes, Jason was murdered by Joker. DC in the 80s was leaning heavily into darker themes with amazing releases such as The Killing Joke and Arkham Asylum. Hence, Jason's death wasn't out of place at that time, but it became so much more visceral, getting fans involved. DC in one fell swoop increased audience engagement and retention, as well as bedding any gripes people had about the character in probably one of the coolest and most iconic ways in pop culture. This then inevitably, as many of you would know, led to the creation of Tim Drake, and even further on, the Red Hood, which is even more fascinating. Tim is the son of Jack and Janet Drake, prolific archaeologists and very successful business people. I'm talking Bruce Wayne's level of money. Uniquely, he deduces the identity of Batman and Robin by piecing together the facts, instead of being taken directly into the Bat family. He broke away from the tragedy mode, as well as mirroring Bruce's character in different ways to Dick. He had the same traits that made fans adore Batman. Let's not forget, it's Detective Comics, following the world's greatest detective. Tim appeased the ideals at that time, as well as being able to pull away from Dick Grayson in meaningful ways, arguably becoming the second most popular Robin of all time, even having the longest running solo issue of any Robin. You can in real time just see how impactful the audience is. They not only removed the character but created a more conserved and very well received alternative, all because they didn't like Jason's personality. This, however, does paint us in some god or deciding light, but the nuance of the relationship between fans and the writer is a bit deeper. Jason as Robin was voted off. Jason as Red Hood, instant fan favorite. Now, I need to go into some comic book lore here just to show the impact of this reveal. Post Jason's death, there was legit a say. Nobody stays dead in comics except Bucky, Jason Todd, and Uncle Ben. Even fan sentiment amongst all comic readers was that these guys were not coming back. However, writers understand that fan sentiment doesn't mean it's bad writing, it just means people don't like it. Hence his grand return in the early 2000s was insane. It not only subverted all of the expectations, they took all of Jason's motivations, but with the added brutality of his new character perversed by the Joker's torture. He followed more contemporary ideas, showing how trauma still prevails in his character, donning the Joker's very own moniker but not being a slave to it, choosing to be a hero regardless of what he went through. Although his earlier years still poke out with how he chooses to deal with his enemies, still not completely conforming with Bruce's ideals. The writers understood something we maybe couldn't see at the time, but there was always a place for Jason in the greater narrative of Batman and the Bat family. He might have just been a bit too early for his time. This push and pull between writers and readers is the relationship I want to highlight, that neither is necessarily correct in their approach, and sometimes fan sentiment can be blinded by nostalgia and writers can be stubborn in wanting to put their own beloved creation onto paper. But together, that's when some dope shit happens. It's insane to me how one kinda disliked character led to 25 years of new loved characters and incredible storylines. Now I'm gonna put Robin's speech on hold for a moment because Damien is just a juicy point on his own, so keep that in mind for later.
We've covered how we directly affect our favorite shows, but I want to dive further and see how when a writer succeeds so heavily on the creation of a character, they indirectly shoot themselves in the foot and create one of their biggest problems. I present Exhibit A, the original Prince of Hard Work, and iconic for all Naruto lovers. Rock Lee in the original Naruto was consistently within the top 8 characters, peaking at number 5 in fan popularity polls, never in the entire lifetime of the manga dropping below top 20. So, why am I stating well-known facts? Because I believe Rock Lee was supposed to die. Pretty outlandish theory, but before I can run into the bedrock of my beliefs, as is becoming a consistent theme with this video, context is necessary. Editors. Now, as much as I'm telling you that you are important to the outcome of the story, these old men are 10 times that. Editors work in tandem with all story writers, whether manga or your favorite novel. They are a pivotal part in the process. They help refine and develop stories that maybe aren't so fleshed out, which is especially prevalent in serialized manga or comics, as well as giving and in some cases, removing ideas from the original story. It sounds crazy, but as much as we love our favorite authors, I challenge you to find me a successful story without great credit to an editor and or someone to that effect. So now that I've glazed and explained editors, another vital role they play, especially in the context of manga, is understanding how fans relate and are reacting to the story. As an author, you just want to deliver your work. Hence, you can easily get absorbed in your work and maybe stop paying attention to those around you. As a publisher, you want your authors to make you money. As an editor, you bridge that gap, finding room for profitability, as well as keeping in line with what the original vision was for the story. It's not glamorous, but it is the reality of the situation. As much as we'd love these unfiltered masterpieces to come from the creatives, it's simply not feasible in the modern era. How does all of this link to Lee dying? Lee was too popular for his own good. Kishimoto himself has said he never expected Lee's popularity. In hindsight, it's easy to see why a hardworking, talentless kid is golden for insecure teens. But our boy Kishimoto did not see that. However, the editors did. I believe that Kishimoto originally planned for Lee's death against Kimimaro. I have a few reasons. The more obvious one, Lee from Sasuke retrieval arc onwards has zero development. Lee from the start of Shippuden to the end can only open 6 gate. Not only not progressing in strength, he legit has zero impact on the plot. The only relevant thing that I can remember is him yeeting a kunai so Minato can body block the Truth Seeker orb. How does a fan favorite showstopper become so useless? Because he was never planned to be there. Now, the next point is subjective, but I don't think I'm so out of touch for it to be called a bad take. But if Lee did die when I believe he was supposed to, I think it not only fixes him being functionally dead in Shippuden, but it fixes other characters' motivation and development as well. It is poetry having the demon who wrecked your village more or less allowed for your beloved leader to be murked and crippled everyone's favorite Bruce Lee clone to avenge his death. I understand in the show that the villagers squashed their beef because they understood it was Orochimaru manipulating all along. But I mean, come on, you cannot convince me the same villagers who abuse a literal child for something he absolutely did not do are that rational and emotionally mature. I think realistically, there would have been some resentment amongst the villagers, and someone who has a large force in causing so much damage going to help save one of your own as well as avenging a beloved member of his society would do wonders for repairing those bridges. More importantly, it would serve as a nice segue for Gaara's character as well, to really show his newfound value for life and appreciation for it. This in the story makes a lot of sense for me as a lover of Naruto. And deadass, Lee has been my favorite character since minute 1. I was not the only one who instantly fell in love with Lee, and the editors knew this. I unequivocally believe, due to his popularity, Lee was kept alive to placate the fans in what was already gearing up to be quite a dark manga anyway. To bring this all kind of full circle, Lee, as do other anime characters, come under this unique bubble where they're so popular that losing them is bad for business. Hence, they're kept either by playing a more important role than originally intended or by becoming a glorified cheerleader. I truly believe we as fans can have that much influence that we can prevent even the most bloodthirsty mangakas from killing certain beloved characters. In case you still don't believe me, Yuji was supposed to die early on, but Akatami kept him alive due to popularity, so it is a thing.
It's easy to forget sometimes that writers are people too. While we love to view their creations as independent art forms disconnected from the real world, the truth is creators are always products of their time. They live in the same world we do, read the same news, and feel the same global tension that we experience. That external environment inevitably seeps into the stories they tell, sometimes subtly, sometimes drastically. A famous example of this comes from One Piece, specifically during the Alabasta arc, where Oda had initially planned to kill off Pell, the Falcon fruit user, in a dramatic act of sacrifice. Pell's arc was leading to a heroic finale where he would fly a massive bomb into the sky, saving the kingdom of Alabasta at the cost of his life. It was thematically consistent, emotionally powerful, and would have been a classic storytelling, a noble sacrifice. But something changed. The arc was being written around 2001, and in the wake of the September 11 attack, the world was engulfed in a completely different emotional climate. A character inspired by Arab culture blowing himself up, even heroically, now read less like an emotional sacrifice and more like an uncomfortably close mirror to a global tragedy. Oda, whether consciously or not, made the decision to let Pell live, and while some fans criticized the fake-out death, it was a great example of how real-world sensitivity can affect the most established story arcs. And it wasn't only about avoiding controversy for the sake of it, it was about recognizing that stories aren't told in a vacuum. Creators are held not just to narrative logic, but to cultural context. A decision that might have made perfect sense in 2000 could suddenly be wildly inappropriate or damaging in 2001. This idea extends beyond global events like 9/11 and bleeds into slower, more subtle cultural changes, like the evolving traits we accept or reject in our heroes. Let's go back to Jason Todd again. In the 1980s, his characterization as the second Robin was bold and confrontational. He was emotionally volatile, self-righteous, and often directly challenged Batman's decisions. The traits he displayed was a cocky sense of justice and unwillingness to follow orders blindly, and a more brutal approach to crime fighting that didn't sit well with the readers at the time. These were traits that clashed with what people expected in their heroes. As mentioned before, he was voted off in a Death in the Family, a literal example of fan rejection influencing canon. But what's fascinating is how these exact same character traits, which in the 80s were considered annoying, disrespectful, immature, are now celebrated in another Robin, Damian Wayne. Damian is easily one of the most arrogant, smug, and morally complex Robins we've ever seen, and yet, since his debut in the mid-2000s, he's become a fan favorite. So what changed? The answer lies in how cultural expectations have evolved. The early 2000s was a post-Dark Knight era of storytelling. Audiences had become more open to flawed, difficult, and morally ambiguous characters. The heroic archetype was no longer just about righteousness, it was about realism. Anti-heroes, emotionally damaged protagonists, and characters who made you uncomfortable became more popular than the clean-cut, idealistic leads of earlier decades. Damian, with all his superiority complex and violent upbringing, fit that mold perfectly. Jason Todd was a square peg in a round hole in the 80s, but Damian Wayne in the 2000s was the mold. If Jason was introduced today with the same exact personality, he might never have been voted off. Or more interestingly, he might not have needed to become Red Hood at all because his original traits wouldn't have been rejected in the first place. That says less about Jason or Damian as characters and more about the time they were written in. It proves how audience perception is rarely static. It morphs with each generation's cultural values, societal pressures, and even their political climate. What this ultimately reveals is that writers are constantly balancing their own creative intentions with the weight of current event cultural sentiment. Sometimes it's a matter of sensitivity, like with Oda rewriting Pell's fate to avoid the unintended implication of glorifying suicide bombing. Other times, it's a shift in taste, like with Damian Wayne being accepted for personality traits that once doomed Jason Todd. Neither instant means the writing was better or worse, it just means it was contextual, and that context matters. It's easy to look at a story in isolation and ask, why did they do this? But when you zoom out and look at the world outside the panels or episodes, you realize that a lot of these choices aren't just story writing. Writers are trying to tell compelling stories, but they're also trying to tell relevant ones. So whether it's avoiding a plot beat because the world just witnessed a global tragedy, or embracing a character's edge because the culture now celebrates boldness over obedience, every story is shaped, at least in part, by the time in which it was made.
Fan theories. The excitement of discovery, the thrill of guessing the next big reveal, and the sense of community that comes from collectively picking apart the stories we love. It feels like participation, Like, you're not just a spectator, you're involved in the narrative. But there's a hidden side to this, one that most fans never consider: the unintended pressure it puts on the writers. Because even when it's coming from a place of love and deep investment, too much speculation can alter the very stories it's celebrating. One Piece creator Ichiro Oda is one of the most well-known modern examples of a writer dealing with this phenomenon. Oda has been on record multiple times saying that he actively avoids fan theories online, not because he's so out of touch or dismissive, but because fans are just too smart. He's admitted that people sometimes get so close to the actual plot points that it forces him to change or pivot his plans. And this isn't just a throwaway comment, it's something that's clearly affected how he approaches storytelling in a particularly hilarious and telling moment. Oda even made a joke about this kind of fan speculation in the Wano arc with Kinemon. For context, during a crucial scene, Kinemon appears to have masterminded a complex and flawless infiltration plan, something fans took as a sign of genius writing and clever character development. But Oda pulls the rug out from under us, revealing that Kinemon actually misunderstood the plan entirely and just lucked into success. When the other characters begin praising him, Kinemon just goes along with it, not wanting to ruin the moment. This moment is more than just comedic relief. It's a self-aware jab at how fans often retroactively assign brilliance and intentionality to things that weren't meant to be that deep. It also shows how writers can become caught in a shitstorm of fan interpretation. In essence, Oda is saying, you guys are making me look way smarter than I actually am, which is both funny and weirdly sobering. It reminds us that not everything is a 4D chess move. Sometimes it's just storytelling, but when enough fans read between the lines, even the simplest plot point can start to look like prophetic genius, and the pressure to keep that illusion can be exhausting for a creator. This isn't just a manga issue though. George R.R. Martin, the author behind A Song of Ice and Fire, has spoken at length about this very dilemma. Like Oda, Martin has stated that he completely avoids fan websites, forums, and theory videos. His reason is blunt: he doesn't think it helps. In interviews, he said that reading fan theories can influence his thought process in ways that are creatively damaging. One of his most well-known quotes on the matter is, you read a theory and suddenly think, oh my god, what if that's better than what I was going to do? And then you start second-guessing everything. That level of doubt can completely derail a writer mid-draft. He explains that when you start reacting to your audience while still building the story, you risk compromising your original vision. It's not about arrogance, it's about preserving the integrity of the narrative. Because the story you set out to tell might get lost in the fog of trying to surprise people who already have a roadmap. Martin's decision to isolate himself from the fandom isn't disrespect, it's discipline. He recognizes that in today's theory-saturated culture, the smartest thing a writer can do might be to put up creative blinders. The strange irony is that fan theories come from a place of admiration. When people obsess over every detail of their story, it's the highest form of flattery. But it also puts writers in a constant race against their own audience. Suddenly, you're not just writing your story, you're trying to stay 2 steps ahead of a million amateur detectives with too much free time. And while that pressure can sometimes elevate a story, it often forces unnecessary pivots or twists that exist solely to avoid being predictable. And predictability, by the way, isn't inherently bad. It just means your story made sense. But in today's internet culture, I saw it often gets confused with it wasn't good, and writers are acutely aware of that. Oda and Martin, despite working in entirely different mediums and genres, have come to the same conclusion. Too much fan speculation doesn't enhance the story, it endangers it. Because even if the fans guess right, it robs the moment of its emotional power. The shock is gone, the discovery is gone, and sometimes the meaning is gone too. So, when we talk about fans influencing storytelling, it's not just about petitions, feedbacks, or votes. Sometimes it's the existence of speculation that changes things. It's the fact that creators are now hyper aware of their audience's eyes, scanning every panel, every sentence, every bit of background lore, and this creates a strange push and pull, where the creator wants to surprise, subvert, and deliver, but also wants to remain true to what they originally envisioned. Writers like Oda and Martin have shown that even the most successful storytellers feel that pressure, and many are choosing to close the blinds and tune out the noise, not out of ego, but out of necessity. Because in a world where even curiosity can cause course correction, sometimes the best way to tell your story is to forget that anyone's listening. At the heart of all of this is a simple idea. Storytelling is not a one-way street. As much as we like to imagine writers as isolated visionaries crafting perfect narratives in a vacuum, the reality is far more collaborative and far more chaotic. Fans don't just consume stories anymore, they influence them. Sometimes that influence is direct, like literally voting a character off the page. Other times, it's indirect, such as when a writer decides to change a plot point because a theory online got too close to the truth. Writers respond to our reactions, our expectation, our praise, our criticism, even when they try not to. And this constant back and forth, this quiet, Unspoken dialogue between creator and audience can lead to some of the most powerful moments in storytelling. Tim Drake doesn't exist without Jason Todd's downfall. Red Hood doesn't happen without the audience rejecting Jason's time as Robin. And maybe the One Piece itself has shifted shape more than once just because a fan came too close to solving the puzzle. It's fascinating, a little intimidating, how much power the audience actually holds. But with that power comes some responsibility. Because while this relationship between fans and writer can lead to emotional payoffs, unexpected twists, and legendary arcs, it can just as easily result in broken pacing, forced rewrites, or stories that feel like they lost their original soul. That tension between creator and consumer is what defines modern storytelling. It's not about one side being right or having more control. It's about how both sides, one telling the story and one interpreting, end up shaping the final result together, even if they're not always aware of it. When that relationship works, the results are unforgettable. And when it doesn't, we're left watching a train wreck in slow motion. But either way, it proves how deeply connected we are to the stories we love and to the people bold enough to try and tell them. Anyways, subscribe. Otherwise, I'll vote you off. Thank you. Love you. Bye.